At 7:59 on Monday morning, I was fired. No warning, no official letter. Just a sudden meeting popping up on my phone at 7:56. Subject line, 2 words. Quick sync, location. HR conference room, 18th floor. 3 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who believed arrogance could replace experience. Derek Cole, the new CEO, nephew of a major investor. He looked exactly like the polished figures I'd seen at startup conferences. Navy-tailored suit, silk tie loosen, just enough to look both successful and casual. Melissa, the head of HR, sat beside him. Her eyes flickered, never quite meeting mine. The notebook in her hands trembled with every breath she took. Derek began, voice flat, each word as if read from a script. "Clara, we've reviewed the structure and decided to sunset your role." Sunset. A word meant to sound gentle, conjuring images of twilight. But in his mouth, it was just a shell hiding a brutal decision. Elimination. I tilted my head, as if listening to a freshman stumble through borrowed vocabulary. In nearly 2 decades at Redwood Dynamics, I'd heard every kind of corporate spin, but no one had ever thought they could turn a person into a sunset with a single word. Melissa's eyes lifted for a moment, caught mine, then dropped quickly. I saw guilt there, but fear as well. I didn't blame her. In corporate chess, HR is always a pawn. Derek was different. He crossed one leg over the other, leaned back, spinning a green smoothie cup like we were in a cafe instead of a room where a life was being decided. A thin smile flickered, but his eyes stayed locked on his phone. A man who had never learned to look someone in the eye when saying something that mattered. I didn't answer right away. I let silence fill the room. Sometimes silence weighs more than 1,000 words. And in that silence, my mind ran back to the early years with Eleanor Redwood. I remembered one night, when the company was still in a cramped garage, Eleanor said to me, "Clara, one day we'll have to sit across from people who believe the chair gives them power. But a chair is just wood and fabric. Real power lies with the one who knows how to run the machine." Her words echoed in my head like a refrain. I drew a slow breath and nodded once. No protest, no questions. I stood, picked up my bag. The coffee I'd brought from my kitchen still steamed. But I left it on the table. The door closed behind me, and the hallway on the 18th floor suddenly felt longer. Faces glanced at me, then turned away, as if their eyes could turn me into a ghost. Keyboards clattered, chairs rolled, printers hummed. Everything went on as if nothing had happened. In corporations, private tragedies are quickly swallowed by the machine. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply walked steady, like someone who already knew this moment was inevitable. By the time I reached the lobby, morning light spilled through San Francisco's glass towers, painting the marble floor gold. I paused, looking at my reflection in the glass. Calm, steady. Not the face of someone defeated. At 7:59, they thought they'd erased me from Redwood Dynamics. But only I knew. That was when the real game began, because next I would trigger the Founder's Clause, a provision Eleanor and I had drafted 15 years ago. A clause most of the board had forgotten, and Derek certainly never knew existed. I stepped out of the building. The bay wind tugged my hair, salty on my lips. I opened my phone, didn't call anyone, didn't send a message. I just looked at the clock. 8:01. The countdown had begun. And to me, every passing minute wasn't a loss. It was leverage. I thought of Eleanor. Last night we worked late together, her voice hoarse but firm. "Clara, if I'm ever gone, don't let Redwood fall into the hands of men who only talk. This company needs builders, not performers." Her words shone like a beacon in my darkest moment. I smiled and kept walking. "Yes, Eleanor, I know what I have to do. Maybe before I go on, I should say one small thing. Stories like this, about power, loyalty, and the forgotten clauses that can shift an empire, aren't easy to find. If you think this one is worth hearing through to the end, take a second to subscribe. It's like saving your seat in the boardroom. You won't miss when the next chapter begins. And the next chapter will take you back to the early days, when Eleanor Redwood stood at her peak, and when I first understood what it meant to carry a legacy. When the conference room door closed behind me that morning, my mind carried me back nearly 2 decades. Back before Redwood Dynamics had its gleaming glass headquarters on the San Francisco Bay, before its bold logo graced market reports, before investors in tailored suits crowded around a polished boardroom table, Back then, Redwood was nothing more than a rented office in a rundown building, rusty pipes snaking along the ceiling, the faint smell of watered-down coffee drifting through the air. Eleanor Redwood, the founder, the first captain of the ship, sat in the middle of that room. Her fiery hair lived up to her name, marker in hand, as she filled a whiteboard with dense sketches. The first time I walked in, she was explaining data architecture to a group of young engineers, comparing it to building a bridge. If the foundation fails, the entire bridge collapses. In technology, the foundation is process. I leaned against the wall, listening. I had come from finance, years in banks, in rooms full of cold numbers. But Eleanor had a way of making even data and process feel alive, like stories with a pulse. When the meeting ended, she turned to me directly. "Do you believe a company can outlive its founder?" I answered without hesitation. "Yes, but only if the foundation is strong enough." Eleanor smiled. It was the first time she ever smiled at me. "Then help me build that foundation, Clara." From that moment on, I wasn't just a financial advisor. I became her partner. Over time, her COO, her right hand. The early years were anything but easy. There were months we barely had enough to cover half the payroll. Eleanor and I spent sleepless nights calling every vendor, begging them to extend credit. I remember her tapping the table, eyes steady on mine. Processes make permanence. Whoever owns the process owns the power. I wrote it down in my notebook, and I've kept it ever since. We endured cold refusals from investors, harsh audits, and nights when we feared there wouldn't be enough cash to open the doors the next morning. Through it all, Eleanor sat upright, filling whiteboards with ideas, while I quietly prepared the contracts, the procedures, the paperwork that kept the wheels turning. The company grew. The office moved from a rented floor to a tower on the bay. Investors started knocking instead of walking away. The team swelled from a handful to hundreds. And through it all, Eleanor wasn't just CEO. She was a friend, a mentor, a sister. She often told me, "Clara, a company only stands if its leader believes in their partner." I remember one board meeting where she said it plainly. "If one day I'm not here, Clara is the only one I trust to keep Redwood standing." It wasn't flattery. It was entered into the record. A few investors frowned, but no one dared object. Then illness struck. At first it was quiet doctor's visits, an absence here or there. Then memory lapses, sudden silences, in the middle of a thought. I stayed close, covering for her when she faltered, like a sailor steadying the wheel when the captain hesitates. In her final months of clarity, Eleanor called mine. She slid a thick folder across the table, her eyes more serious than I had ever seen. "This is the founder's trust." I built a special clause into it. "If you are ever removed unfairly, control reverts to you. Not because you're family, but because you're the foundation." I turned the pages, dense with legal text. Section 4.8, marked in red. A clause that seemed obscure at first glance, but written with surgical precision, guaranteeing that if the board, or anyone else, ever pushed me out unlawfully, they'd be handing me the key to return. "This is a precaution," Eleanor said. "I've seen too many companies collapse under heirs who didn't deserve the seat. Redwood won't be one of them." She also left a recording, her voice low but steady. "Clara, this company cannot fall into the hands of men who only talk. If I'm gone, you know what you must do." I stored that recording in 3 places, on a hard drive, on an encrypted server, on a USB locked in a safe, not because I doubted her, but because I knew one day that proof might be the only thing keeping the company alive. Looking back now, I understand why, walking out of that boardroom, I didn't tremble. While Derek thought he'd won, I knew I only had to wait a few hours, because the founder's clause wasn't some forgotten scrap in a cabinet. It was Eleanor's legacy, the key she placed in my hand long ago to use at the moment it mattered most, and that moment had arrived. After all those years, Eleanor gradually stepped into the background, and I carried the weight of operations. I was used to risk, contracts collapsing, investors changing their minds, but nothing could have prepared me for the day Derek Cole walked into Redwood Dynamics. Derek wasn't a stranger to the board. He was the grandson of Victor Cole, one of the company's earliest investors. Victor was clever, but he always believed blood was worth more than experience. When Eleanor began to fade from the spotlight, Victor lobbied the board to bring Derek into leadership. He called it the new generation. I still remember Derek's first day in the office. He walked through the lobby like the world had been waiting for him. Tailored suit, polished shoes, a wide grin, and a thin laptop tucked under his arm like a stage prop. He shook hands, greeted people by name, though it was clear he was reading from a cheat sheet. At his first all-hands meeting, he opened with a line I'll never forget. It's time for Redwood to rely less on legacy and more on fresh energy. Synergy, that's the word we'll live by. Synergy. I nearly laughed out loud. In my career, I'd seen dozens of so-called rising stars use that word. Grand, empty language to cover the truth. They had never done anything hard enough to understand what it really took to run a company. A few young employees clapped, eager. But the veterans, the ones who had seen Eleanor and Meste up all night just to make payroll, exchanged quiet looks. We all knew a storm was coming. The weeks that followed, Derek launched his so-called reforms. He hired a group of old college friends and called them the strategy team. One had been expelled for cheating and was now head of data analytics. Another, known only for holding court in loud bars, was suddenly director of vibes. Yes, that was the official title. And my meetings began to vanish. My access to strategic documents was trimmed. Urgent calls that once landed on my phone were redirected to Derek's new assistant, a young man more interested in Instagram followers than business continuity. I kept working. I kept the system running, but I could feel myself being edged further and further to the sidelines. One Friday afternoon, I walked past the hall and overheard Derek speaking to HR. Clara has museum energy. She keeps things preserved, but we need something more alive. I paused for a second, then kept walking. Some would have felt insulted. I only gave a thin smile, because when someone underestimates you, what they're really giving you is time. Time to prepare. Derek's decision-making style became obvious. Fast, impulsive, and more about optics than substance. He replaced the internal wiki system with a Slack channel titled Bryce Notes. And yes, he even misspelled his own name in the header. Standardized procedures were tossed aside, replaced by short, emotional blurbs. The following Friday, he announced Fun Shirt Fridays. Everyone was encouraged to wear loud shirts, as if that could solve operational strain. Younger staff played along, snapping pictures for social media. But the senior managers only sighed. I didn't resist. I let it play out. I didn't need to win the small skirmishes. I was waiting for the decisive moment. While Derek chased PR tricks, I stayed late. I pulled up old records, PDFs from 2008, 2009. No one else remembered. I combed through every line of the corporate charter, every signed contract. I made copies, notarized them, and stored them in multiple locations. I knew one day they'd be my shield. That day came sooner than I expected. One morning, I noticed my calendar access was restricted. I was no longer invited to strategy meetings. Instead, I was CC'd on emails, a gesture polite enough to avoid complaint, but clear enough to show I'd been pushed outside the circle of power. I wasn't surprised. Eleanor had warned me. Clara, the board will forget your work someday. But they cannot erase the paperwork. She was right. The moment Derek walked into my office for the first time, I knew the clock had started ticking. He was never the type to confront. He wouldn't argue or debate. He would wait for a morning, schedule a neat little meeting, and deliver a dry announcement. And I knew, when that moment came, I had to be ready. Deep down, I didn't hate Derek. I just felt sorry. Sorry that a company built on sweat and sleepless nights was now in the hands of someone who valued slogans over results. Eleanor once said, "Legacy isn't buildings or logos. Legacy is people. And if the wrong person holds power, legacy turns into a burden." I remembered her words. And I knew when Derek made his move to push me out, he had no idea he was triggering the wire. One clause. One notarized document. One memorandum from 2009. That was all it would take to flip the board. I walked out of the building at 8:10, not in the posture of someone defeated, but like a chess piece deliberately moved off the board, waiting for the next strike. Derek probably thought he had cleared an obstacle. What he didn't know was that his move had triggered the very mechanism Eleanor and I had prepared years ago. I headed straight for the underground garage and slid into the seat of my old sedan, the one that had carried me faithfully for a decade. I sat still for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, exhaling slowly. I wasn't shaken. Instead, a sharp clarity took hold. This was the moment Eleanor had predicted, and I had spent 10 years preparing for it. My first stop wasn't home. It wasn't a cafe. It was a notary's office on Market Street, 15 minutes from Redwood Dynamics. I had chosen it long ago. Quiet, discreet, but reputable enough that every stamp carried immediate legal weight. At 8:41, I stepped inside. The heavy wooden door shut behind me. The air smelled of old paper and fresh ink. Mrs. Harris, the notary, looked up, raising an eyebrow at the thick folder in my hands. We had met before, during the quiet renewals and certifications I had arranged in the background. I never wasted a chance to prepare. "I need this entire file sealed," I said evenly. Mrs. Harris flipped through the first few pages, then looked up at me with a trace of curiosity. "Founder's clause," she murmured, as if touching something rare. I didn't explain. I only nodded. In the legal world, silence can underline the weight of a document better than words. The red stamp hit the page with a crisp thud, final, like a gavel striking in court. From that moment, the game had changed. At 9:02, I stepped out with the sealed envelope in hand. On the steps, the special courier I'd arranged in advance was waiting. Blue jacket, leather satchel hanging heavy at his side. "Only to the General Counsel of Redwood Dynamics," I instructed. "Direct handoff. Nothing less," he nodded. He knew this wasn't just another delivery. I checked my watch. 9:05. The wheel was in motion. That envelope carried more than a letter. It contained a 19-page dossier, a copy of the 2009 bylaws, appendices, a reconfirmation dated 2018, the recorded statement of Eleanor declaring her intent to preserve the legacy, all notarized, time-stamped, backed with banking proof that I had never accepted severance. If Derek thought he could sunset me with a sloppy email, he was about to stare into the blazing sun of the law. I didn't go home. Instead, I stopped at a small cafe across from Redwood's tower. I took a seat in the corner, hidden but with a clear view of the revolving doors. I watched the steady stream of young employees rushing in with laptops and caught a glimpse of Derek himself striding across the lobby, smug as if he had already won. He had no idea that only a few blocks away, a courier was carrying an envelope toward Redwood's general counsel, a delivery that could set his CEO chair on fire. I opened my notebook and wrote a timeline. Every step, every minute. 7:59, terminated. 8:41, documents notarized. 9:02, documents dispatched. 1,000, deadline for counsel to receive and confirm. When my phone clock hit exactly 10, I set my pen down. "The piece has been placed," I whispered. "And no one can stop the clock now." Through the cafe window, Redwood's glass tower gleamed. Inside, Derek was probably in a room with his college friends, the ones he called his strategy team. Maybe he was planning a PR campaign, maybe showing off a new logo. What he didn't know was this: the next 72 hours wouldn't belong to him. They would belong to me, and to Eleanor. I took a sip of bitter coffee and remembered one of our last late nights together. Eleanor had placed her hand on the Founder's Trust, her voice raspy but firm. "Clara, when the time comes, don't hesitate. This clause isn't for revenge. It's for protection. You're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting the company." Her words echoed through me like a bell, and I knew, this morning, I had done exactly what needed to be done. 17 a.m. I sat in the cafe watching Redwood Dynamics across the street when a blue courier van pulled up to the front. The courier strode inside, leather satchel heavy on his shoulder, disappearing through the glass doors. I knew within minutes that the sealed envelope would be on Lisa Carter's desk, Redwood's general counsel. And like a stone dropped in water, the first ripples would start spreading. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A text followed. Urgent. Need to talk. HR, I smiled. Too fast. Derek must already feel something slipping. Across the street, I could picture the scene on the 20th floor. Derek slammed into a leather chair, face flushed red. Lisa opened the thick file, each page stamped bright with red seals. "What the hell is this?" Derek snapped, pounding the table. Lisa didn't blink. "Founder's clause. It's valid. Reconfirmed in 2018. I thought we got rid of all that outdated junk. We retired forms. Not bylaws. You signed the reconfirmation 3 years ago." Silence. Derek, scrambling in his memory, turning toward his green legal team, bright faces barely 3 years out of law school. Is there any way to kill this? I don't care how. Just do it. Now. By noon, a message from an old friend inside legal reached me. They're trying to backdate HR files. I sighed. Exactly as I expected. The easiest way to neuter the founder's clause would be to pretend my exit was done properly. Board approval, severance paid, notice on record. The problem was, I had everything to prove otherwise. In my bag that morning, a bank record showing no severance had ever been paid. The HR meeting invite was stamped 756 or just 3 minutes before termination. An audio memo I'd recorded the moment I walked out, time-stamped, noting every word, and most critical of all, the notarized seal at 8:41. With an electronic timestamp no one could erase. They could rewrite their files, but they couldn't rewrite time. That afternoon, Derek convened an emergency leadership meeting. A loyal former colleague sent me one text. He's losing it, shouting that you're the past, that Redwood needs to move forward. I could see it clearly. Derek paced the room, clutching a water bottle he never opened. His voice booming, but his eyes darting away from the thick folder in front of Lisa. One of the veterans, someone who had stood with me for a decade, probably asked, if this clause is real, what's the plan? And Derek, I knew, answered with the same hollow confidence he'd once used on me. We'll handle it. Laws are meant to be interpreted. Money is meant to be leveraged. This is a new era. I won't let some legacy figure stand in the way. While he flailed, I sat quietly in the cafe, marking down each time checkpoint in my notebook. I didn't need to push. Once the piece was placed, every next move belonged to him. And Derek, a man who never understood the rules weren't his to write, would walk himself into a corner. By 5 p.m., my attorney emailed 3 words. They're panicking. Attached was a leaked internal memo, HR rushing to alter meeting minutes, changing dates to make it look like the board had approved my termination a week earlier. I chuckled, not out of contempt, but out of recognition. Panic always births mistakes. The more they scramble to cover, the deeper the hole beneath them. That night, I sat at my small desk, lamplight glowing over neatly stacked files. I called my lawyer, speaking slowly. Log for the record. Day 1. Derek responds by backdating. I hold proof of falsification. On the line, my lawyer laughed. You know, sometimes I think you were born to script your own life. Maybe. But this script had its prologue written long ago by Eleanor. I was simply carrying the story forward. Before bed, I opened my laptop, creating a new folder. Reversion day, ignition files. Inside, Isavet everything. Bank receipts, HR email, scanned notarization, legal notes, staff messages. I knew once the clock started ticking, everything had to be ready. And the clock had been ticking since 7:59 a.m. 2 days after my firing, the cracks began to show. Not in a sealed boardroom, but out there, in the news cycle, inside the staff, and on the trading floor. That morning, I opened my laptop and found an email from an anonymous sender. Subject line, Slack leak. Inside were screenshots. Derek, in his usual smug tone, had typed into strategy notes, spring cleaning, baby. Out with the old. A few young employees responded with clapping hands, flames, and even fireworks. But what I noticed were the silences. Familiar names, people who had stayed up with me in 2008 to secure our first client, did not react. Their silence was louder than any emoji. Another screenshot. Derek boasted to the channel that my job could be done by a simple AI plugin. No one replied. Just a string of eye emojis. The quiet stare of those who understood but wouldn't speak. I saved every screenshot in the ignition files. Not because I needed more evidence, but because in a crisis, careless words weigh more heavily than any contract. By midweek, the storm had spilled beyond Redwood's walls. A major tech outlet ran the headline, Redwood Dynamics faces leadership turmoil, veteran COO ousted amid legal questions. I smiled as I read. Reporters smell blood from miles away. Once they catch the scent, the wolves arrive. By late afternoon, Redwood's stock had dropped 12%. For a company known for stability, that number was an alarm bell. On social media, small investors howled. One asked bluntly, "Are we investing in vision or in a cheap circus act?" Inside Redwood, things were no calmer. Gossip spread faster than press leaks. A former assistant messaged me, "It's strange here, Clara. Some are scared, some are furious. HR walks the halls with their heads down. Everyone knows something's wrong, but no one dares to ask." The next day, a group of employees gathered outside headquarters, holding signs that read, "Redwood deserves real leadership." They didn't shout. They didn't chant. They stood in silence, letting silence itself be the message. Derek, of course, chose his usual response, PR. Thursday afternoon, he staged a press conference, inviting local media and a handful of tech bloggers. I streamed it live. He walked on stage in an open-collar shirt, a forced smile plastered across his face, eyes betraying strain. "Redwood is entering a new era," he declared. "New blood, no baggage. We're no longer dragged down by the past. This is the age of speed, of energy, of synergy." I laughed when I heard it. Synergy again. He clung to that word like saying it enough times could make it true. The press saw it differently. On Twitter, one veteran journalist wrote, "If this is a new era, it starts with superficiality." Another quipped, "New blood, no backbone." Within hours, the clip of Derek saying synergy 10 times in 3 minutes went viral. Looping as a meme across every platform, I stayed silent. No posts, no interviews, no statements. I let Derek drown in the wave he'd created. Eleanor once told me, "Clara, never argue with someone turning themselves into a clown. Let the audience see for themselves." And they were seeing. By Friday, the crisis had boiled over. Another anonymous email reached me, this time with an Excel file attached. I opened it. A Q4 cash flow projection. Same formulas, same notes, same structure I'd built for years. Only one difference: the header now reads, "Optimized by Derek." I shook my head. The man couldn't format a spreadsheet to save his life, yet he slapped his name on my work. I didn't rage. I just saved it to Ignition files. One day, the truth would speak for itself. By week's end, the storm was uncontainable. Market's Redwood stock is at a 5-year low. Media from TechCrunch to the Wall Street Journal questioning the CEO's competence. Internal senior staff resigning. The head of HR officially quit, citing no longer aligned with current leadership. I sat in my apartment, scrolling through headlines. I wasn't gleeful. If anything, I felt a hollow ache. Redwood Dynamics was my blood, my youth. Watching it stumble under someone unfit felt like watching a house I built set aflame. But I knew this truth: sometimes to put out a fire, you have to let it burn all the way down. That night, I replayed Eleanor's recording. "Clara, this company cannot fall into the hands of a man who only knows how to talk." Her voice steadied me. My silence wasn't a weakness. It was preparation. In my notebook, I wrote, "Day 2, crisis goes public. Stock falls, staff unrest, PR collapse." I signed it, closed the book. The clock was still ticking. And when it struck the 72-hour mark, everything would change. Day 3. The clock had passed halfway. 48 hours since my firing, less than a day left before the clause locks in. I sat in my apartment with a steaming cup of coffee by the window, watching San Francisco rush below. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from former staff, industry friends, reporters asking for interviews. He answered none. I didn't need to speak. The one talking too much was Derek. That morning, Redwood Dynamics announced a massive rebrand. I knew because the press release hit even my personal inbox. Derek hadn't bothered to remove me from the list. Subject line, "Redwood 2.0, new blood, no baggage." I chuckled. They'd turned that clumsy phrase from the press conference into a full campaign. New logo, new website, glossy videos of fresh-faced employees grinning under bright office lights. No mention of Eleanor, no trace of the past. In the video, Derek stood in a sterile white room, button-down shirt, voice brimming with false conviction. "Redwood is no longer the old company. We are refreshed. We are renewed." He repeated renewal so many times I thought the screen might crack. The reaction within hours, Twitter exploded. One account with hundreds of thousands of followers posted, "Renewal or erasing history to cover failure." A former employee shared an old photo of Eleanor and me in our cramped 2010 office, captioned, "This was Redwood." "Not that glossy video?" The post went viral. On LinkedIn, a market analyst wrote bluntly, "No company builds trust by disowning its foundation. Redwood is cutting out its heart." By afternoon, Derek called an emergency board meeting. My contact inside told me the air was suffocating, not tense. Derek stumbled in, shirt wrinkled, tie crooked, dark circles setched under his eyes. He still forced bravado. This is when we stand tall. PR storms pass. The press will get bored. What matters is Redwood 2.0. Anyone against it doesn't belong in our future. This time, no nods. A veteran director asked, "Have you considered Clause 4.8 if it stands? Everything you're doing is meaningless." Derek snapped. "It's just old paperwork. Legal is handling it." Lisa, the general counsel, cut in coldly. "No, Derek, it was reaffirmed. It stands. And we have less than 24 hours. The room went silent. Only the sound of a pen tapping the table. Derek's eyes darted, then he barked, "We can stall. Sue, drag this out. I will not let Clara come back and ruin everything." That night, he launched one last desperate move, a personal PR blitz. A 10-minute YouTube video, his eyes staring into the lens, voice cracking with forced emotion. "I know there are rumors. I know some aren't happy. But I believe in a new Redwood, where the past doesn't chain us. I'm the one to lead Redwood forward." He even faked tears, choking mid-sentence on the pressures of leadership. The video spread, but not how he hoped. Comments swarmed with doubt. One said, "This isn't a CEO, this is a B-movie actor." Another sneered, "If you have to cry to convince us, you've already lost." While Derek flailed under the spotlight, I stayed silent. No counter videos, no flashy statements. I just prepared another set of documents, original contracts signed by Eleanor, her recorded voice, all authenticated by my attorney. I called him, steady and clear. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. If the board hasn't acknowledged it, release everything to the press." Not a minute late. He answered simply, "Understood." That final night, I sat at my desk, lamp casting a pale glow over the page. I wrote in my notebook day 3, Derek's rebrand and personal PR. Failure. Trust collapsed. Board fractured. Clause 4.8 is about to activate. I set the pen down, closed the book. The clock struck 11. 9 hours left. Eleanor once told me, "The one who waits is the one who walks in at the right time." And I knew, come morning. I would walk in, 7:45 a.m., day 4. The city lay under a cold fog, but inside me, everything was clear. I put on a plain black coat and stepped out of my apartment. In my pocket, a small USB holding every piece of evidence, the clause itself, and Eleanor's recorded voice, burned like a guiding light. For 72 hours, I had stayed silent. Derek had exposed his own weakness with arrogance and haste. But today, the voice would not be mine. It would be Eleanor's words on paper. At 800 sharp, I walked into Redwood Dynamics. The glass doors slid open as if recognizing still belonged there. Employees in the lobby froze when they saw me. Some nodded, some only stared, eyes mixed with shock and hope. I knew to them, my presence alone was the answer after days of uncertainty. Floor 20, the heavy wooden doors opened. The boardroom stretched out a long walnut table, leather chairs, white light pressing down on a tense room. The board sat in full. At the head, Meredith Stone, the chairwoman, her face carved in stone. Beside her, General Counsel Lisa Carter, 2 folders in front of her, one black, one red. Derek was already there, looking worse than ever, shirt wrinkled, tie crooked, eyes bloodshot. He tapped the table with jittery fingers, trying to feign calm, but failing. And in the corner, the one I knew would appear Victor Cole, Derek's grandfather, an early investor. His back hunched, hair nearly all white, but his eyes still sharp from decades of business wars. He sat quietly, both hands gripping his cane. His presence weighed on everyone. Meredith tapped her pen 3 times. "We begin," Lisa stood, voice crisp. "In the past 72 hours, we reviewed the documents submitted by Clara Evans. They concern the Founders Clause, Section 4.8 of the 2009 bylaws. All are notarized, electronically time-stamped, and reaffirmed in 2018. No evidence shows the clause was ever voided." The air thickened. Every sound, pens tapping, leather creaking, cut through. Lisa continued. "This clause states if COO Clara Evans is terminated without board approval, without full severance, and without proper notice, operational authority reverts to the Founders Trust. The trust names a legal successor. Derek shot to his feet, shouting, "Nonsense! Just old paperwork. Outdated. A technicality. Nothing compared to the reality of running a company today." Meredith's cold glance cut him down. "Sit, Derek. This is law, not feelings." Victor finally spoke, voice gravelly, but carrying across the room. "We forget something. Redwood exists because of my capital. Without me, there is no Redwood. Derek is my blood. If Eleanor were alive, she would never want the company in the hands of someone outside the family." He turned to me, eyes sharp. "Clara, your service is respected, but service is not blood." I met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Cole, Eleanor built this company not just on capital, but on trust. And she placed that trust in me, not bloodline. Otherwise, this clause would never exist." Victor's lips pressed tight. His eyes flickered, but he stayed silent, gripping his cane. Lisa opened the black folder and produced a sealed envelope. "This is the certified copy of the Founders' Trust, sealed in 2019 before witnesses and a notary. Today, by rule, we open it to read the named successor." The room froze. No one moved. Lisa slit the seal. The rip of paper echoed like a ticking clock. Inside lay a single ivory sheet, Eleanor's signature bold and clear. Lisa skimmed it, then looked up at me, nodding. Meredith gave the signal. "Read it." Lisa's voice carried solemn. "The successor named in the Founders' Trust upon activation of Clause 4.8 is Clara Evans." The room turned to stone. I stayed seated. No smile, no triumphant nod. Just steady calm. Derek's scream broke the silence, voice cracking. "No! She was just the COO operations. I'm the CEO. I'm Redwood's future." Lisa answered like steel. "No, Derek, this is legally binding." Eleanor signed, notarized. "The clause stands. The board has no power to erase it." Victor's cane slammed against the floor with a sharp crack. "No, this betrays family. I invested my life savings for this, and now what my grandson discarded for a piece of paper?" Meredith's gaze pierced him. "Not a piece of paper, Victor. Eleanor's legacy. And you signed the 2018 reaffirmation yourself. Or have you forgotten?" Victor faltered. He remembered. He knew. He had signed. He turned to Derek, eyes filled with pain. "Derek, I gave you the chance. You squandered it." Derek sat in silence, lips trembling. Meredith tapped her pen again. "We vote." Hands rose one by one. Every hand, even Victor after a pause, was shaking. Meredith declared, "Effective immediately." "Clara Evans assumes operational authority of Redwood Dynamics." I rose. No grand speech, just a USB into the screen. Words appeared, steady hands, clear eyes. Then a simple plan: stabilize staff, reconnect with employees, restore investor trust, and continue Eleanor's legacy. No empty slogans. Just certainty. Derek stumbled back, voice trembling. "You'll regret this. She'll collapse the company." I met his eyes, voice low, firm. "No, Derek. Companies collapse under those who ignore their foundation. Eleanor trusted me to hold the foundation, and today it still stands." He opened his mouth, but no one listened. The meeting adjourned. Outside in the hall, employees waited. They didn't cheer. They applauded, steady, firm, like a heartbeat finding rhythm again. I paused, breathing deep. Eleanor had been right. The one who holds the foundation holds the house. And today, Redwood came home. When the meeting ended and I stepped into the hallway, what I felt wasn't triumph or revenge. It was something deeper, a stillness, steady and unshakable. The applause of the employees outside rolled in, solid, rhythmic, like the sound of a heartbeat. In that moment, I knew. Everything had returned to where it belonged. Redwood wasn't glass towers or polished logos. It wasn't empty slogans like synergy or new blood. Redwood was people. It was Eleanor. It was the young engineers who once typed code in a leaky office with trembling hands. It was the accountant who stayed up all night balancing payroll so families would wake up to food on the table. It was sweat, dreams, and scars. Eleanor once told me, "Clara, a company isn't just a product. It's a collective memory. If we're gone one day, hold on to that memory for everyone." Today I understood her completely. That afternoon, I called an all-hands meeting. No bright lights, no glossy videos. Just me, standing on a wooden platform before hundreds of employees. I began with a single line. "I'm not here to talk about Redwood 2.0. I'm here to remind you what Redwood really is." I told them about Eleanor, the founder with fiery red hair, standing in a shabby office, drawing data architecture as if it were a bridge. I told them about the nights we begged suppliers for extensions so we could pay salaries. I told them about the despair and the persistence that carried the company through. The room was silent. The younger faces, who had never known those early battles, watched as if hearing the company's origin story for the first time. The veterans, their hair touched with gray, their eyes lined with fatigue, nodded slowly, remembering what they had almost forgotten. "I will not promise quick change," I said. "I will promise only this. Redwood will be led with steady hands and clear eyes. Not with tricks, but with truth." And then I repeated the words that had glowed on the screen that morning. Steady hands, clear eyes. This time the applause rose. Real, steady, from the heart. Derek left quietly. The board had his exit papers ready. He didn't look at me when he signed. Victor, his grandfather, lingered a little longer. Before leaving, he turned back, his voice rough. "Clara, maybe Eleanor was right. I was wrong to believe blood mattered more than foundation." That was the last time I saw him. In the weeks that followed, Redwood began to recover. The stock stopped falling, then edged back up. Headlines shifted. Redwood regained stability under Clara Evans. Investors called, their voices lighter. Employees returned to their work without the sidelong glances that once filled the hallways. I knew the storms weren't over. No company escapes them. But now Redwood had its foundation back. And that foundation wasn't mine alone. It was Eleanor's gift. I was the only one who guarded it and carried it forward. One night before drafting the new strategy, I opened the USB. Eleanor's voice filled the room, raspy but clear. "Clara, this company cannot fall into the hands of someone who only talks." I sat in silence, eyes closed, letting her words guide me. And I smiled, not because I had won, but because Redwood was still alive. And now, if you're listening to this story, I'll leave you with one final thought. In life, you will meet Derek's, people who believe fancy words can replace real work. And you will meet Eleanor's, the ones who know true strength comes from foundation, from persistence, from the small routines that keep the ship afloat. The lesson isn't just for companies. It's for life. When you're cast aside, when someone dismisses you as old or outdated, remember this. Sometimes, the thing they call old is the only thing strong enough to hold everything upright. And if you prepare, if you wait, if you stay ready, you will know exactly when to step back in. Eleanor once told me, "The one who knows the foundation is the one who stands in the end." I pass those words to you. Keep your hands steady, keep your eyes clear, because one day you may be the one who saves the house someone else tried to burn down.